Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I am 29 years old, and I come from Poland. Today, I can speak English. I can have conversations with people from different countries. I can watch English videos, read technical articles, and understand discussions without feeling lost. But if you met me 3 months ago, you would see a completely different person. 3 months ago, my English was very weak. I knew some words. I could read a little. Sometimes I could understand simple sentences when people spoke slowly. But speaking English was a completely different story. Whenever I tried to speak, my mind became empty. I would think of a sentence in my head, but when I tried to say it, the words disappeared. Sometimes I knew the words, but I couldn't connect them. Sometimes I started speaking but stopped in the middle because I didn't know how to continue. Many times I stayed silent because I was afraid of making mistakes. Even a simple sentence like, "How are you?" felt uncomfortable for me to say. I remember one moment very clearly. Someone once asked me a question in English. I understood what the person meant, but I couldn't answer properly. I tried to speak, but the words came out broken and slow. After that conversation, I felt embarrassed. Not because the person laughed at me. The person was actually kind. But I felt embarrassed with myself. Because at that moment, I realized something important. My English was holding me back. And that realization hurt. You see, I had a dream. My dream was to become a software developer and work with international companies. I loved technology. I loved coding. I spent hours learning programming and trying to build projects. But there was one big problem. Almost everything in the tech world is in English. Programming tutorials are in English. Technical documentation is in English. Most programming communities communicate in English. Even job interviews for international tech companies are in English. And every time I tried to learn something new, I faced the same wall. English. I would open a tutorial video and struggle to understand the explanation. I would read documentation and feel slow because I needed to translate many words. Sometimes I understood the code, but I didn't understand the explanation around it. And the most frustrating part was this. I knew that my technical ability was improving, but my English was limiting my growth. It felt like I was standing in front of a door that could change my future, but I didn't have the key to open it. That key was English. At first, I tried learning casually. Sometimes I watched English videos. Sometimes I read articles. Sometimes I practiced vocabulary. But my progress was slow. Very slow. Because I was not serious. I was treating English like something optional. Something I could improve later. But that embarrassing moment when I couldn't answer a simple question changed my mindset. That night, I sat alone and thought about my future. I asked myself a simple but powerful question. If I continue like this, where will I be in 5 years? The answer was uncomfortable. If I didn't improve my English, many opportunities would remain closed. I would stay limited. I would stay behind people who had the courage to improve their communication. And that thought made me realize something important. English was not just another subject to study. It was a skill that could completely change my opportunities. So that night I made a decision. Not a weak decision, a serious one. I told myself something very clear. For the next 3 months, I will take English seriously. Not someday, not when I feel motivated, but starting tomorrow morning. And I made another rule for myself. I would not depend on expensive language schools. I would not wait for the perfect course. I would not make excuses about time or money. Instead, I would use the resources I already had: my phone, my laptop, the internet, and most importantly, discipline. I promised myself that every single day I would expose my brain to English, listening, reading, speaking, even if I made mistakes, even if I felt uncomfortable, even if my progress was slow, because I understood something very important. Languages are not learned in one day. They are learned through daily exposure and daily practice. So that night I went to sleep with a completely different mindset. Not as someone who was afraid of English, but as someone who had finally decided to take control of his learning. And looking back today, I can tell you something honestly. That decision was one of the most important decisions I ever made. Because over the next 3 months, something slowly started to change. My ears started understanding English better. My mouth started forming sentences more easily. My confidence started growing. Step by step, day by day, the language that once scared me started becoming part of my daily life. And today, I want to share that journey with you. I will explain exactly what I did, what mistakes I made, what helped me the most, and how my English slowly improved. And I promise you something. If you listen carefully to this story, you will realize something powerful. This is not just my story. With the right habits and the right mindset, this can become your story too. The turning point. I still remember that day very clearly. It was not a huge disaster. No one shouted at me, no one insulted me. Nothing dramatic happened on the outside. But inside me, something changed forever. At that time, I was already trying to become a software developer. I was studying coding almost every day. I spent hours learning programming languages, watching tutorials, reading articles, and building small projects on my laptop. I was serious about my future. I really wanted to improve my life. I really wanted to work in tech. I wanted a career where I could grow, earn better money, and build something meaningful. And slowly, my technical skills were getting better. I was not amazing yet, but I was improving. I could understand code better than before. I could solve simple problems. I could build small projects. And because of that, I started feeling hopeful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my future was becoming clearer. I started looking at junior developer opportunities online. Some were local jobs, but many of the most exciting ones were international. Remote jobs, global teams, better pay, better learning opportunities. And almost every one of them had one thing in common: English. The job descriptions were in English. The required skills were explained in English. The company websites were in English. The application process was in English. And I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. Every time I looked at these opportunities, I felt excited for a few seconds, and then nervous. Because deep inside, I knew something painful. My coding skills were improving, but my English was not strong enough. At first, I tried to ignore that feeling. I told myself things like, "It's okay, I'll improve later. Maybe my technical skills matter more. Maybe my English is not that bad." But honestly, I knew I was lying to myself. Then one day, something happened that forced me to face the truth. I found an opportunity that really excited me. It was not a huge dream job, but for me, it felt important. It was a junior-level software role with an international company. The position was remote. The work looked interesting. The technology stack matched what I had been learning. and for the first time, I felt like maybe I had a real chance. I remember looking at that job posting again and again. My heart was beating faster. I was excited, but I was also afraid. Still, I decided to apply. I told myself, if I don't try, I will never know. So I prepared my resume. I checked my projects. I reviewed some technical questions. And then I got a response. They invited me to the next step. I was shocked. I was happy. I felt nervous, but I also felt proud. It was a small moment, but it meant a lot to me. Because suddenly my dream did not feel so far away. It felt possible. Then I read the next email carefully. There would be a short online conversation. Part of it would be about me, my background, my projects, and my interest in the role. And it would be in English. The moment I read that line, my excitement changed. My stomach dropped. I felt pressure immediately. I remember sitting in silence and staring at the screen. I knew the technical side would be challenging, but manageable. But the English part, that was the part I feared the most. Still, I did not want to give up. So I tried to prepare. I wrote down possible questions. Tell us about yourself. Why do you want this role? What projects have you worked on? What technologies do you know? I practiced answers in my room. But when I practiced alone, I already noticed the problem. My answers sounded broken. Slow, unnatural. I stopped in the middle of sentences. I translated in my head. I forgot simple words. Sometimes I had the idea in my mind, but I could not say it clearly. And that made me even more nervous. The day of the interview came. I was sitting at my desk with my laptop open. I had water next to me. I had notes next to me. I tried to look calm from the outside. But inside, I was full of tension. Then the call started. The interviewer was polite, friendly, professional. He smiled and started with a simple question. He asked me to introduce myself. That should have been easy. It was my own story, my own life, my own background. But in that moment, my brain froze. I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that I was from Poland, that I was learning software development, that I had been building projects, that I was excited about the opportunity, that I wanted to grow and work with an international team. I knew all of that in my mind. But when I started speaking, the words came out slowly and awkwardly. I paused too much. I searched for simple words. My grammar was broken. My voice did not sound confident. I could feel it. And the worst part was not that I made mistakes. The worst part was that I knew I was not showing my real ability. Inside, I had more to say. I had ideas. I had passion. I had effort. But my English was trapping all of that inside me. The interviewer asked another question about one of my projects. Again, I understood the question. Again, I knew the answer. But expressing it clearly was hard. I spoke in short, broken sentences. I missed details that I could have explained in my own language very easily. At one point, I even forgot a very simple word. I paused, tried to remember it, couldn't. And I felt embarrassed. Not because the interviewer was rude. He was actually very patient. But I felt embarrassed because I realized something painful in real time. This was not a technical problem. This was an English problem. The interview ended politely. No one humiliated me. No one told me I was bad. But when the call ended, I sat there in silence. I did not even touch the glass of water next to me. I just stared at the screen after the meeting had ended. And in that quiet moment, I felt a very heavy truth. I was not behind because I was lazy. I was not behind because I was stupid. I was behind because I had ignored something important for too long. English. That day, I understood that English was not just useful. It was essential. It was not just another skill to learn later. It was directly connected to my future. It was directly connected to my career. It was directly connected to the opportunities I wanted. And the truth hit me hard. I could keep improving my coding for the next year. I could build more projects. I could study more tools. But if I still could not communicate in English, I would keep feeling blocked. That realization stayed with me all evening. I remember walking around my room thinking about the interview again and again. Not in a self-hating way, not like I'm useless. No, it felt deeper than that. It felt like a wake-up call. I kept asking myself one question. How many more opportunities will I lose if I don't fix this now? That question changed everything, because suddenly English was not just about language anymore. It was about freedom. It was about career. It was about confidence. It was about becoming the kind of person who could actually enter the rooms he dreamed about. That night, I sat down and made a decision. A real decision. Not the kind of decision people make when they feel emotional for 5 minutes and then forget the next morning. A serious decision. I told myself, for the next 3 months, I will focus on English every single day. Not only when I feel motivated, not only on weekends, not only when I have extra time, every single day. I also made another promise to myself. I would stop saying, my English is weak as an excuse, and I would start treating English as a daily responsibility, just like food, just like sleep, just like work. I did not have money for expensive classes. I did not have a private tutor. I did not have the chance to move to another country. But I had something else. I had the internet, I had my phone, I had my laptop, I had my voice, and most importantly, I had a reason, a strong reason. Not a random reason, not English is useful. No, my reason was clear. I wanted to become a software developer who could work with international companies. I wanted to understand documentation faster. I wanted to follow tutorials without feeling lost. I wanted to speak in interviews without freezing. I wanted to stop feeling small every time English appeared in front of me. That reason became my fuel. And that night was the turning point. Not because my English suddenly improved. It didn't. The next day, I was still struggling. The next week, I was still making mistakes. The next month, I was still not fluent. But the turning point was powerful because my mindset changed. Before that day, English was something I wanted. After that day, English became something I was committed to. And that difference changed everything. Because once a goal becomes serious, your behavior changes. Your attention changes. Your effort changes. And that is exactly what happened to me. That interview did not give me the job I wanted, but it gave me something even more important. It gave me the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful gift, because the truth wakes you up. And that day, I finally woke up. Month 1. The foundation phase. The month I rebuilt my English from zero. After that interview experience, I made a very serious decision. I told myself something very simple but very powerful. For the next 3 months, English will become part of my daily life. Not something I study once in a while. Not something I do only when I feel motivated. But something I do every single day, just like eating food or brushing my teeth. However, the first thing I realized was very important. If I tried to do everything at once, I would fail. Speaking, grammar, vocabulary, listening, pronunciation, reading, all together would be too overwhelming. So I decided that month 1 would not be about speaking perfectly. Month 1 would be about building a strong foundation, because I understood something very clearly. You cannot speak confidently if your brain does not understand English automatically. So my first goal was simple: train my brain to understand English every day. My daily routine in the first month. In the beginning, my English routine was simple but very consistent. Every day after waking up, before checking social media or doing anything else, I spent 1 hour with English. This hour became my most important habit. I divided that hour into 3 simple parts: listening, reading, and understanding. The first thing I did: listening to simple English every day. The first thing I started doing every morning was listening to English. Not complicated English. Not fast English. Very simple English. At first, I made a big mistake. I tried listening to normal native English content. Movies, podcasts, interviews. But I understood almost nothing. It was frustrating. So I changed my approach. Instead of listening to difficult English, I started listening to slow English learning content. Content made for learners. Content where people speak clearly and slowly. At the beginning, even that was difficult. Sometimes I had to replay the same sentence 3 or 4 times. Sometimes I understood only 60%. But I kept listening. Every single day. Something interesting started happening after about 10 days. My ears slowly began recognizing words faster. Words that sounded confusing before started sounding clearer. My brain was slowly getting used to the rhythm of English. And that gave me confidence. The second thing I did: reading simple English. The next thing I added to my routine was reading. But again, I did not start with difficult material. I avoided complex books and advanced articles. Instead, I focused on simple English stories and short articles. When I read something, I followed a very simple process. First, I read the sentence slowly. Then, if I did not understand a word, I wrote it down. But I did not stop every few seconds to translate everything. If you translate every single word, your brain never learns to think in English. So I only checked the meaning of important words. Words that appeared again and again. Then I read the sentence again, slowly. This helped me understand how English sentences are naturally built, how people connect ideas, how they express simple thoughts. After about 2 weeks, something amazing started happening. When I read a sentence, sometimes I understood it without translating in my head. That was a very powerful moment for me, because it meant my brain was starting to process English directly. The third thing I did: building my vocabulary the smart way. Another mistake many learners make is trying to memorize hundreds of random words. I decided not to do that. Instead, I focused on high-frequency words. Words that appear in everyday conversation. Words used in normal situations. Every day I learned about 10 useful words or phrases. Not just single words, but phrases. For example, I'm working on something. I'm trying to improve. I'm not sure yet. These kinds of phrases are very powerful in real conversation. So, instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary, I practiced small, useful expressions. Then I tried using them when speaking to myself. Yes, I started speaking to myself in English. At first, it felt strange, but it helped me connect words to real thoughts. The fourth thing I did: I started thinking in English. Whenever I was walking somewhere, cooking, or doing something simple, I tried describing things in English in my mind. For example, this coffee is too hot. I need to finish this project. I should study for another hour. These were very small sentences, but they helped my brain start thinking in English naturally. I realized something important during this process. Fluency does not come from memorizing grammar rules. Fluency comes from using English repeatedly in simple situations. The fifth thing I did: recording myself. Every night, I opened my phone and recorded myself speaking for 2 minutes. Nothing complicated. I just talked about my day. For example, today I studied coding for 3 hours. I watched a tutorial about JavaScript. I learned some new English phrases. At first, my speech was slow and full of mistakes, but that was okay. The goal was not perfection. The goal was practice. After recording, I listened to my own voice. Sometimes I noticed mistakes. Sometimes I noticed pronunciation problems. But listening to myself helped me understand how I sounded. And slowly, I became more comfortable hearing my own English voice. By the end of the first month, something important had changed. I was not fluent yet. I was still slow. I still made mistakes. But 3 very powerful improvements happened. First, my listening became much better. I could understand simple English much more easily. Second, my confidence improved. English no longer felt like a scary language. It started feeling like something I could actually learn. Third, my brain became more comfortable thinking in English. And that was a huge step. Because when your brain starts thinking in English, speaking becomes much easier later. Month 1 was not about becoming fluent. Month 1 was about building the foundation, the habit, the discipline, the daily exposure. It was the month where English stopped being a school subject and started becoming part of my life. But the real transformation did not happen yet. Month 2, the confidence phase, the month I forced myself to speak. I told myself something very important before starting month 2. If I wait until my English becomes perfect before speaking, I will wait forever. So I accepted a simple truth. My English would not be perfect. I would make mistakes. I would forget words. I would say strange sentences. But I would speak anyway. That mindset changed everything. The first thing I did: I started speaking every day. In the first month, I spoke a little when recording myself, but it was not my main focus. In month 2, speaking became my main training. Every single day, I forced myself to speak English for at least 20 minutes. Not once a week. Not when I felt confident. Every single day. Sometimes I spoke in the morning. Sometimes in the evening. Sometimes while walking. But I never skipped speaking practice. Even when I felt tired. Even when I felt lazy. Even when I felt embarrassed about my English. Consistency was more important than comfort. I started with the simplest possible exercise. Every day I described my day in English. For example, I would say things like, "Today I woke up at 7 in the morning. I worked on my coding project. I studied JavaScript functions. I watched a tutorial about building websites. At night, I practiced my English again." These sentences were simple, very simple, but they helped me connect English to real life. And that was important, because many learners only practice English with random topics. But real fluency comes when English becomes connected to your real daily experiences. The second thing I did: I practiced conversations with ChatGPT. I started practicing conversations using ChatGPT. Before that, I had a big problem. I did not have many people around me who spoke English regularly. So I needed a way to simulate real conversation. And that is when I started using AI conversations. I would ask ChatGPT simple questions like, "Ask me questions about my day." "Let's practice a job interview." "Let's talk about technology." Then I would answer those questions out loud. Sometimes I typed. Sometimes I spoke the answers to myself. This helped me in 3 important ways. First, it gave me unlimited conversation topics. Second, it forced me to think of answers in English. Third, it removed the fear of being judged. Because when you practice with a tool, you feel free to make mistakes. And mistakes are extremely important in learning. Every mistake teaches your brain something. The third thing I did, I stopped translating in my head. One of the biggest problems I noticed in the beginning was translation. When someone asked me a question in English, my brain tried to do something slow and complicated. First, it translated the English sentence into my native language. Then, it created an answer in my native language. Then, it tried to translate that answer back into English. This process made speaking very slow and sometimes confusing. So I started training my brain to skip this translation process. Instead of thinking, Polish sentence, translate, English sentence, I started thinking directly in simple English. For example, if I wanted to say, "I need to work on my project today," I did not think of the Polish sentence first. I tried to think directly in English. At first, this was difficult, but after practicing every day, it became easier. My brain slowly started building ideas directly in English. This was one of the biggest improvements during month 2. The fourth thing I did, I shadowed native speakers. Another powerful technique I discovered during month 2 was something called shadowing. Shadowing is very simple. You listen to a sentence in English. Then you immediately repeat it, trying to copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and tone. I started doing this with short English videos. I would listen to a sentence, pause the video, repeat the sentence out loud. Sometimes I repeated the same sentence 5 or 6 times, not because I wanted to memorize it, but because I wanted my mouth to get used to producing English sounds. Speaking English is not just about knowing words. Your mouth also needs training. Your tongue, lips, and voice need practice. Shadowing helped me develop this physical speaking ability. The fifth thing I did, I practiced explaining things. Instead of only describing my day, I started explaining things in English. For example, I explained how a simple website works. I explained how JavaScript functions work. I explained how my coding project worked. This exercise was very powerful because explaining something forces your brain to organize ideas clearly. It also teaches you how to use English to express logic and information. At first, I struggled. Sometimes I stopped in the middle of explanations. Sometimes I did not know the right word. But every time that happened, I searched for a simpler way to explain the idea. This improved my communication ability a lot. The sixth thing I did, I spoke even when I felt uncomfortable. There were many days in month 2 when I did not feel confident. Some days my English felt slow. Some days I forgot basic words. Some days I felt like I was not improving. But I continued anyway. Because I had learned something important. Confidence does not come before speaking. Confidence comes because of speaking. Every time I spoke, my brain became a little more comfortable. Every mistake became a small lesson. Every sentence became a small victory. At the end of the second month, something incredible happened. My English was still not perfect, but I noticed a huge difference. First, I could speak much longer without freezing. Second, I no longer panicked when I forgot a word. Instead, I simply explained the idea in another way. Third, conversations started feeling more natural. English was slowly becoming a language I could actually use. And the biggest change was in my confidence. 2 months earlier, I felt afraid to speak. Now, speaking felt challenging but exciting. And that is when I realized something powerful. Fluency was getting closer. But the biggest breakthrough was still coming. Because the 3rd month was when everything finally connected together. Listening, thinking, speaking, confidence. That was the month when my English finally started feeling natural. Month 3. The breakthrough phase. The month English finally started feeling real. Month 3 was the month where all the things I'd been practicing slowly started connecting together. Listening, reading, thinking in English, speaking every day, shadowing, using ChatGPT, recording myself. Everything I did in the first 2 months started giving stronger results. Month 3 was the month where English stopped feeling like a school subject and started feeling like a real communication tool. That was the biggest change. At the beginning of the 3rd month, I made one more decision. I told myself, this month, I will stop acting like a learner who is only preparing. I will start acting like someone who already uses English. That sentence changed my energy. Until then, I was still carrying a little fear. A part of me still thought, I am practicing. I am getting ready. I am not there yet. But in month 3, I wanted to shift my identity. I wanted my brain to stop thinking of English as something distant. I wanted my brain to accept something new. English is now part of my life. That mindset pushed me to use English more seriously in daily situations. The first big change, I increased my speaking time. In month 2, I spoke English every day for around 20 minutes. In month 3, I increased that time. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes 40, sometimes more. But I did not just speak more. I spoke in more realistic ways. I stopped doing only easy exercises. I started creating situations that felt closer to real life. For example, I practiced introducing myself naturally, talking about my software projects, explaining why I wanted to become a developer, answering common job interview questions, sharing my opinions on technology, work, discipline, and daily life, describing problems and solutions, asking questions and answering them. This was very powerful because I was no longer just practicing English. I was practicing the exact kind of English I needed for my future. That made my learning more personal, more useful, more real. The second big change. I started speaking longer without stopping. In the earlier months, I usually spoke in short pieces, a few sentences, small answers, simple descriptions. But in month 3, I pushed myself to speak for longer stretches without stopping. At first, I did this alone. I set a timer for 3 minutes. Then I picked one topic, and I tried to keep speaking until the timer ended. Some days the topic was my daily routine, my biggest challenge in learning English, why I want to work in tech, how I built one of my coding projects. At first, this was hard, very hard, because when you speak for longer, you cannot depend only on memorized sentences. You must think in real time. You must connect ideas. You must keep moving even when you are not fully comfortable. That exercise forced my brain to become faster. It forced me to build mental flexibility, and something amazing started happening. At the beginning of month 3, 3 minutes felt long. By the middle of month 3, 3 minutes felt possible. By the end of month 3, I could speak for much longer with much more comfort. That was one of the clearest signs that my fluency was growing. The third big change. I stopped panicking about mistakes. This was huge. Maybe one of the biggest changes of the whole journey. In the beginning, every mistake felt dangerous. If I forgot a word, I felt stress. If my grammar was wrong, I felt embarrassed. If I pronounced something badly, I felt frustrated. But during month 3, I finally understood something important. Fluency does not come from speaking without mistakes. Fluency comes from continuing even when mistakes happen. That changed everything. Because once I stopped panicking, my mind became much freer. If I forgot a word, I explained it another way. If I made a grammar mistake, I kept going. If I said something awkwardly, I corrected it and moved on. That freedom made my speaking smoother. Before, mistakes stopped my flow. Now mistakes became part of the flow. And that is a very important difference. Real communication is not perfect. Real communication is alive. It moves, it adjusts, it continues. Once I accepted that, my confidence grew quickly. The fourth big change. I practiced real interview English. Because my main reason for learning English was my software developer career, I made month 3 very practical. I started preparing for real interview situations. Not only technical answers, but human answers. For example, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to become a software developer? What technologies have you used? What project are you most proud of? What problems did you face while learning? Why do you want to work with international teams? These questions mattered to me because they were connected to my real future. So I practiced answering them again and again, not by memorizing full scripts like a robot, but by learning how to express my real ideas more clearly each time. At first, my answers were slow. Then they became more natural. Then they became stronger. I noticed that when the topic mattered to me personally, speaking became easier. Because I was not trying to sound advanced. I was trying to express something true. That made my English more real. The fifth big change. I used English more outside my study time. This was one of the most important things in month 3. I stopped limiting English to study sessions. I started using it throughout the day. For example, when I was coding, I read documentation in English without avoiding it. When I searched for solutions online, I read English explanations more patiently. When I watched tech tutorials, I stayed with the English version instead of looking for easier alternatives. When I thought about my goals, I sometimes did it in English. When I wrote notes about my projects, I tried writing them in English. This made English feel more natural because it was no longer only a language I practiced. It became a language I used. That is a powerful shift. A very powerful shift. Because there is a difference between learning a language and living with a language. In month 3, I started living with English more. And that is when fluency really started growing faster. And when I compared my old voice recordings with my new ones, I felt something powerful. I realized, this is working. That moment gave me deep motivation, because now I was not just hoping. I could hear the evidence. I became more comfortable thinking in English. In month 1, thinking in English felt like a struggle. In month 2, it became easier during simple situations. But in month 3, it became much more natural. Not all the time, not perfectly, but naturally. I noticed that when I was doing simple daily tasks, my brain sometimes created English thoughts automatically. I did not force it. It just happened. That was a huge sign of improvement, because it meant my brain was no longer completely dependent on translation. Ideas were starting to form directly in English. That made speaking much faster. And once speaking becomes faster, confidence rises naturally. There was one moment in month 3 that I will never forget. I was having a conversation in English online. Nothing dramatic, just a normal conversation. The other person asked me about my background, my goals, and why I wanted to become a software developer. I started answering, and after a few minutes, I noticed something strange. I was no longer thinking, what is the correct sentence? I was no longer translating every thought. I was just speaking, slowly, simply, naturally, not like a native speaker, not perfectly, but honestly and continuously. And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift. I realized, this is it. This is what I wanted. Not perfect grammar, not a perfect accent, not magic. I wanted freedom. The freedom to express myself. The freedom to answer questions without freezing. The freedom to communicate my ideas. And in that moment, I had it. That was the breakthrough. Not because I became finished, but because I crossed an invisible line. I was no longer the person who was trapped by English. I had become someone who could use English. That feeling was powerful. Very powerful. What fluency really meant to me. After 3 months, at the end of month 3, I still made mistakes. I want to say that clearly. I did not become some perfect, polished English speaker. That would not be real. But I became something much more important. I became functional, confident, comfortable, capable. I could speak to people. I could answer questions. I could explain my ideas. I could understand much more than before. I could read and watch English content with much less fear. And most importantly, I no longer felt blocked. That was the real victory. Because before, English felt like a wall. Now it felt like a bridge. A bridge to my future. A bridge to my career. A bridge to the global tech world I wanted to enter. The biggest lesson. From the 3rd month. If someone asks me today, what changed the most in month 3? My answer is simple. In month 3, I stopped treating English like something outside of me. I started treating it like part of my life. That made all the difference. Because the more natural your relationship with English becomes, the more fluency grows. Fluency is not built by one secret trick. It is built by repeated exposure, repeated effort, repeated speaking, repeated courage. That is what month 3 gave me. Not magic, momentum, not perfection, freedom, not overnight success, a real earned transformation. Looking back at the whole journey. When I look back now, I can see the full picture clearly. Month 1 trained my ears and built the foundation. Month 2 trained my mouth and built confidence. Month 3 connected everything and created fluency. That is how it happened. Step by step, slowly, realistically, with mistakes, with fear, with effort, with consistency. And that is exactly why I believe this story matters. Because it is not a fantasy. It is not some fake story about instant fluency. It is a story about what can happen when someone becomes serious, consistent, and patient for 3 months. And if I could do it, someone who was 29 years old, from Poland, trying to become a software developer, struggling with fear, hesitation, and weak English, then other people can do it too. Not in the exact same way, not with the exact same speed, but they can change. They can improve. They can become confident. They can build a new relationship with English. Because real progress is possible. I know that now. Not because someone told me, but because I lived it. And that is how my 3 months ended. I did not become perfect, but I became confident enough to speak, understand, and communicate. That confidence helped me pass my interview and start my journey as a software developer. Those 3 months taught me something very powerful. Small daily effort can completely change your future. So if you are learning English right now, don't stop. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep practicing every single day. Because one day you may realize that the language you once struggled with became the key that opened new opportunities in your life.